I like DNIP is my favourite. Your DNIP, do nothing in particular.
That's right.
I love that, and I've just started doing that at weekends. Obviously you end up not stopping, but imagine if you'd have organised to do things as well. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Let things find you almost.
I think that's the trouble. I think that being busy has become a bit of a badge of honour. We want to be busy all the time, and we think that makes us, look important and valued and gives us status, when in fact what we need to do for the sake of our mental health and cognitively, so that it improves our memory if we have breaks, but yet we don't want to have breaks. We see rest as something we should only do when we've done everything else, but I think we need to start taking it seriously and mapping in when will you rest as well as when will you do things and be busy.
And it's cyclical, isn't it? Because people used to rest and relax and used to work in order to put food on the table, and as little as possible, and then if you're very fortunate, you'd find something you love, so it didn't feel like work anyway, and that's what sort of we do. Thank God for that. But again, we were talking about this over the weekend. We've made big decisions to get here. We didn't win the lottery, and people who have jobs that they love are often contacted by other people, say, well, it's all right for you, but no, it wasn't all right for these people. They've made these big decisions, and they are forever decisions. And it's often about stripping away things in your life, people in your life, these hours of commitments that are not required. We talked about a book called Essentialism the other week, which is fantastic. First chapter talks about prioritization. What the heck's that? If you have a priority, you don't need to prioritize because priorities are already there. It's like stress management. Don't learn to manage stress. Just don't have stress in the first place. Those kind of things.
Yeah, and so I think what we need to do is to start saying, well, how can I fit rest into my life, and what are the things that I really need to be doing, and what are the things that I can do that are restful? And they can be active things. So 8% of people told us that they found running was the most restful thing they did. So there's lots of people who feel they can't really rest their minds, and that their minds don't stop whirring around with all those thoughts until they can exhaust their body to an extent or exert their body. 38% of people told us that they found walking restful. So it hasn't got to be sort of lying on a sofa doing nothing. It can be something that's very active. It's a question of finding the things that are really feel restful for you and that make you feel relaxed and refreshed afterwards.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because if you do something that seems not meaningless but not that important, but if the side effect of that is you becoming rested or gaining some perspective, then it is very important. So because the byproduct of it is so useful. So on Friday, I was a bit stressed with something that was going on last week. It was a good thing, but it was taking me over, which I didn't like. It was a very, very good thing, actually, but I didn't like it because it was bringing me out of presence. It was making me unconscious, which sounds bizarre because I was focusing on that instead of just being here now. And it was my little boy's birthday party on Saturday, and we hadn't finished his blimmin' scale extra track because it's so complicated, and it's really complicated. And he had to go on a cross-country run after school. So I spent the whole of Friday afternoon, and I should have been focusing on this other thing. Part of the world would say, oh, you need to be doing this. And I thought, no, I've got to do this track because it's really important. It's his birthday party. And I spent 3.5 hours doing it, and I didn't finish it properly, and he had to finish it off because he knows it better. He knows his track inside out, and I don't. But the 3.5 hours flew by, and by the time I'd stopped doing it, I was completely back in the moment. And the other thing that was supposed to be important, it had been quite rightly put in its place by whatever it is that I'd been helped with. And I thought, wow, that's so simple. And it seemed so menial what I was doing, but it was really, really important for a load of silent reasons.
Yeah, and that was restful, the thing you were doing, because it completely absorbed you. And if you can find those activities, the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi called this flow, where you find the activities that completely absorb you, you don't even notice, you're sort of out of time. It's not that time goes fast or goes slowly. You don't even really notice it going. And that might be painting for one person or gardening for another person or making scalextrics for someone else. It can be any of these things that really allow you to stop worrying. It's mostly about these thoughts that go around in your head, worrying often about the future. If you can find the thing that stops those just for a while, and not all the time, it's all about getting the rhythms of rest and activity. So in fact, in our survey, the people who got too much rest, if you like, where rest was probably forced upon them. So perhaps they were ill and couldn't do very much, or perhaps they were unemployed and didn't want to be and didn't have very much to do. Their well-being was lower again. So there's a sort of perfect point of the amount of rest that you can have for the sake of your well-being. If you have too little, then your well-being is lower, and if you have too much, then it goes lower again.
And if you get insecure about not working enough, what happens is if you sleep really, or try and protect your sleep window, and then you also rest in the day, so this is on top of your sleep, then when you go back to do your job for not as many hours as maybe you have been doing, or something that you are more responsible for, you'll be so much better at it, and everybody around you will feel that. And that whatever insecurity you may fear just won't happen.
That's right. And the research shows that even micro breaks, which are like 2 minutes long, make a difference. And so if at work you can, without your boss seeing, lean back in your chair and shut your eyes, or go and stare out the window, or doodle for a while, basically do all the things you weren't allowed to do at school. Research from South Korea has shown an hour later people are still concentrating better just for having that 2 minute break. And at the end of the day, if they've had lots of 2 minute breaks, their levels of well-being are higher at the end of the day. So it hasn't got to be ages, but it just needs to be a little break from what you were doing.
Okay, a little reboot, a mini reboot. It's a switch on, switch off thing, isn't it? It just gets you back to where you should have been in the first place, or where you started. And this is why really clever companies like Google in Silicon Valley have the sleep capsules that you can book as an employee, and you go and have 20 minutes kip, and it's as good for them and as it is for you.
That's right. Yeah, no, it can definitely reboot you again. It can help you to concentrate. And there's studies showing how it can help your memory as well. So just a short break, your memory is then better afterwards. So people often, particularly if they're up against a deadline, people think they'll reward themselves with a break afterwards. In fact, what you should do is try, if you can possibly, to have that break on the way to doing it. Yeah, don't wait till afterwards and then think, I'll get the cup of tea when I finish this piece of work. Go and get the cup of tea and come back, and you'll do the rest of the piece of work faster and better.
And there's also your circadian rhythm, which is every 90 minutes, isn't it? So this Einstein famously, every 90 minutes, he used to feel himself drifting off. His attention was drifting off. And so he would sit back in his chair and he'd hold a pencil in his hand. And when you go to stage 4 of sleep, you can't hold anything. You lose the ability to hold things. So the pencil would fall from his hand, hit the floor, wake him up, and that was 2 minutes later. And he was done again for another 90 minutes, which is great.
Yeah, so we can build these things in to get us going again, as you say, to reboot, so that we can carry on. But I think the trouble is that what we tend to do is press on and press on. So even every hour and a half, most people don't have a break. They carry on and on.
And nervous energy isn't real energy, and that's going to come back and get you one day.
Yeah, and we used to have, people used to have lunch hours, but how many people take a lunch hour now? You sort of need an excuse, like it being your birthday now, to actually have a lunch hour. Yeah. When in fact that would be very good for people if they did that.
So what do you want to talk about? Give us the highlights of those. Give us some takeaways if you don't mind.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of interesting things are in this top 10, like having a bath. Now, I think having a bath is interesting because it's a thing that gives you permission to rest, because you've got to get clean, so it feels as if it's something useful. And yet, if you're lucky, you don't get interrupted. You can have some time to yourself. You can do nothing without feeling guilty because you're doing nothing. And 9% of people told us that they felt guilty if they rested. And so you don't want to feel guilty about resting. You want to feel it is good for your mental health and to give yourself permission to rest. And I think the trouble is that doing nothing in particular and potting around is okay, but actually doing nothing, sitting down, most people find really hard to sit and do nothing. So there was a study in the States where they put people in a room with nothing to do but a table. They had a chair and a table, and they didn't have a phone and nothing to read or anything, and they had to stay there for 15 minutes. And the one thing they did have was an anklet that was attached to a little electric shock machine, and they could give themselves an electric shock if they chose to. And they'd all tried it out beforehand. And these were all the people who said that they would pay not to have another electric shock. And yet 77% of the men and 25% of the women gave themselves at least one electric shock during that 15 minutes. They couldn't bear to do nothing. One man did it 190 times, which is quite good going in 15 minutes. So we don't actually like sitting doing nothing. So that's why we need activities.
Well, we do like it. We just scared.
We find it difficult. Yeah, exactly.
And the bath thing is interesting though, because if you have a bath now, if you choose to have a bath, that's a really, really important decision, is it? Because you don't have a bath to get clean, because you can have a shower and it's quicker and it's more refreshing in many ways. To have a bath, I suspect some people now, if they're renovating a house, they might not put a bath in because they're too scared of having one.
Yeah, and it's interesting that lots of hotel rooms now are changing that space that would have the bath into it into one sort of long, pointless shower.
I know, and you get to a hotel room, the first thing you do is you got a bath. Because one of the great things about going away, or even if you have to go away for work, because your family's not there, you don't have the commitments you usually have. Do you know what? I'll have a bath before we go out for dinner. meet up with my colleagues or wherever it is where we're going. And we did it in recently in, where was it?
Ipswich.
Ipswich.
Yep.
Great hotel, fantastic hotel, lovely staff, lovely service, massive bathroom, huge shower. What do they call it? A wet floor area? What's it called?
Wet room.
Wet room.
Yeah.
No bath.
So disappointing,
What's
isn't
the
it?
point?
So
Loads
disappointing.
of towels. What do we need all these towels for? No point. All right, where else are we going with the chapters?
So there's also daydreaming. That's at number 8. So daydreaming is good for us. As long as you're not ruminating about negative things about the future and worrying away, actually just daydreaming is a thing that is good for us. And I think some of these other activities let us do that. Things like being in nature is number 2. Listening to music is number 4. But the top one, which I thought was really interesting, we were surprised by, was reading. So the activity that more people thought was restful than any other was reading, which is interesting because that involves some effort. You know, cognitively, you've got to think in order to read. But actually, it turns out that one thing that people are sometimes doing when they're reading is not concentrating, which we've all had, where you read the page again and again because you weren't really concentrating. But that's okay. That it could also be a jumping off point for daydreaming. Yeah. And you can track people's eyes in studies, and you can tell that they're not concentrating because their eyes move along and down the page, but they don't pause for the long words and the difficult words as they normally would. But reading just takes us, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, it takes you away from your own life and into someone else's. And so that is distracting. And so I think one of the things that is the essence of restful activities is that they need to be distracting. We need to not feel guilty. We need to be able to give ourselves permission to do those things.
It's funny though, because movement, and I heard this, and I think I agree. Well, no, I do agree with it. If you move, so if you go for a walk, which is very relaxing and very restful, hopefully in a park or somewhere like that by a river, or if you go for a jog or a shuffle or a scuttle or a run or whatever that you like, you won't daydream because you have to be still to daydream. You won't be creative because you have to be still to be creative. So what will happen is if you're moving, you'll always get back to a practical issue, a practical problem. So just beware that, or just switch off completely. But you can't daydream unless you stop moving, which is why reading is a jumping off point because it's something about your body. Your body sends different messages to your brain when it's moving because your brain thinks, oh, well, we have to look after that then. So we can't.
So you're concentrating on certain things while you're walking. Sometimes people will say that they can solve problems, but they are still thinking about that problem, if you like. So people will find it useful if they're stuck to go for a walk. But you're right, it's not the same as sort of daydreaming just about anything
Cloud
at all.
busting, cloud busting, best thing in the world. Lying on the ground, looking up at the clouds, best thing ever. Right, final chapter is very important. Well, the
final chapter is finding the perfect prescription for rest. So finding the perfect prescription for you, because the same activities won't work for everybody. So it's a question of thinking which of these activities are the ones that are really allowing me to relax and stop worrying mainly, and to find those activities, and then to say, I'm going to prescribe myself 15 minutes of that activity. So the thing I really like is gardening. I've got a tiny garden, but now if I'm, say, working at home, when I should be working, I'll allow myself to go outside for 15 minutes, start doing stuff in the garden, and just think, this is good for I'm not going to feel guilty, this is good for my mental health, and this is what I'm going to prescribe myself. This is my excuse anyway. And then the moment I do that, you can feel I feel this wave of calm coming over me, and that will be different things for different people, and it's the question of finding what that is, giving yourself permission to do it and allowing that, and also accepting that your to-do list, this sounds depressing, but your to-do list will never end. So people will often think, well, I'll stop when I've got through the whole list. But even if you can get through your whole list one day, there will be more on it the next day, because unexpected things will happen for the rest of your life. Pipes will leak, people will get ill, all sorts of things will happen.
Sound like Baz Luhrmann.
And
Pipes will leak, people will get ill, politicians will philander.
We need to accept those things.
I love that.
So accept your list.
Okay, great. Lovely to talk to you, Claudia.
The Chris Evans Breakfast Show with Sky.